the topic that we have today is basically looking ahead. We first looked at the history and growth of Islam from the 600s after Christ in Arabia, in an area that had been mostly Christian by that time, all the way to Iraq and Iran and even Afghanistan, and how quickly Islam spread between, first from Arabia, then to Jerusalem and Palestine, then to Egypt, across North Africa, up into what is now Lebanon and Turkey, what is now Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and by the time of Martin Luther, the whole of India, Malaysia, Indonesia. That was the spread. Spain remained in Muslim hands between around the year 700 all the way up to the year before Columbus sailed the ocean blue, 1492. And so that was the early spread of Islam. The second stage of history, after that flowering of Islamic civilization in mathematics and art and the sciences and book learning and all of the rest, that centered in Baghdad, a new city that was created around the year 900, along modern lines of spokes, streets going out like spokes in a ring road. After that came a period of Islamic humiliation. Partly it turned inward, partly, instead of controlling the trade routes between India and China and the Spice Islands, that is Indonesia, it became subject to growing European expansion. And Malaysia from the British, Pakistan from both India and the British, Iraq, created by the British out of its Palestinian mandate, Syria emerged as an independent country, Egypt, first Nasser, do you remember that name, some of you? The military, through a military coup, and then Sadat through all those years, and now whatever the future holds for Egypt. Turkey emerged as the only secular, democratic Muslim country in the world, and has sustained itself in that way since. All right? But along with this independence came a bunch of inept, incompetent, corrupt leaders in most of the Arab countries. And along with it came the pacts, the agreements that the West made with most of them where there was oil involved. Nigeria, with its enormous post-independence corruption over the oil. Saudi Arabia, which still sponsors the most conservative form of Islam. And at the same time, the monarchy has been our ally. And really there's a pact between the two. The monarchy conducts exterior relations, the conservative group, the Wahhabis, the internal, and so on. And so now we're in this uncertain time today. We're in 3 armed conflicts with Muslim countries. And we've all experienced these, these irritating airport delays and security alerts and the effects of terrorism, and we wonder what in the world is the future going to be. About 10 years ago, Samuel Huntington, a Harvard historian, wrote a book called The Clash of Civilizations. Do you remember that? Much acclaimed, much criticized. He said there are emerging 5 dominant civilizations in the world today: the Western, Europe and the United States and part of Latin America, the Islamic, the Sub-Saharan African, the Indian and the Chinese, and I think it's basically that. And he said, to avoid a clash of civilizations, we need to keep out of direct conflict, armed conflict between one or another. And he predicted that if not, there would be a future that involved the clash of an economically powerful China and an economically challenged United States, or between the Islamic civilization attempting to recover something of its past and the West. So, we looked at Islamic teachings last week, and I won't try to summarize those. And so today, I'm going to try to make it a good deal of conversation and comment from you, but I want to briefly go over what I have on the sheet. Now, the future may look bleak. Pastor Tom's sermon this morning on both Ezekiel 37, the Valley of the Dry Bones, a nation that had been super humiliated, and the new life after death in Lazarus spoke of hope. Okay? And I quote John Mortimer. How many of you know that name? A British author, great author. And he created the Rumpole series, if you've ever seen any of that on television. But one of his fictional characters said this: no map of the world, no map of the world is of much interest that doesn't have utopia on it. What did he think? Isn't that great? No understanding of the world that doesn't have a vision of hope connected to it is of much interest. And so that's where I want to start this morning, that we are people who live in hope that dead bones can live again. That was a great metaphor for Israel in captivity, that these bones will, I'm not going to sing it, Lori. I sometimes do, but this is one of the great passages of hope. And of the new life, I know that we have life now, says Mary. And the greatest miracle is not the raising of Lazarus. The greatest miracle is the transformation of human beings. Is a new vision, a new life. Not greed, not selfishness, not conflict, but caring for each other. That's the message of the gospel. Okay. And that's the greater miracle. And what we're asking, I guess, now, today, is with this in the background, specifically with the conflict between the West and Islam today, what's the future? Well, point 2 on my list, I say that there's an analysis that will give us a lengthened perspective of our conflict with Muslims. Muslim-Christian conflict is not new. That was point number 1. It goes way back to the very beginning. It's not only the Crusades, it's 400 years before that of Islamic conquest and expansion. It's not only the Crusades, it's the cultural and colonial clashes for 400 years after the Crusades. The conflict is not everywhere. In some places, Muslims live in harmony with neighbors, even when they are in the majority. We'll survey some of those places. The conflict is not isolated. The radical conservative element in Islam is matched by a similar movement within Hinduism. There's a whole political party that wants to make India not a pluralist country, as it's been since its beginning, but a Hindu state not a state where the 15% of Muslims and the 5% of Christians can live in peace. So in Hinduism, there's a similar kind of movement. In Christianity, there's not been a violent jihadist kind of movement, but there's been a very solid backing for war with Iraq that came out of the churches, for continued conflict in Afghanistan. I know there's realities of the world, but here's the conflict is not isolated. Not only Muslims, but also Hindus, and we could talk about other ethnic clashes. Yugoslavia broke up after Tito, a semi-communist dictator, had held the country together by insisting that they were one people, and he did it with some tolerant authority. It broke up over what? 3 groups. The Bosnians, Roman Catholic, the Serbs, Orthodox, and the Croatians, Orthodox. Croatia, Roman Catholic, Serbia, Orthodox, Bosnia, Muslim. Remember, there was a time when Islam governed the whole of Yugoslavia. It wasn't just religion versus religion, but it was ethnic history versus ethnic history. Do you remember the conflict in Ireland all those years? The terrorist attacks. Lord Mountbatten, the hero of the Pacific War, was killed by an Irish terrorist. Do you remember that? And we're anti-terrorist, but a large chunk of Boston and New York directly supported the IRA. So it depends upon which side we're on. So it's not isolated, it's not new, it's not confined. Islam is in conflict in India with the entire nation. Pakistan has been sending terrorists into Indian Kashmir for the last 60 years for political reasons, but it's Muslim versus Hindu, and so on.